What's up guys, Grandmaster Igor Smirnov is here, and today I'd like to share with you one of the best openings for internet blitz games. It starts with pawn to d4, pawn to d5, and here comes the pawn sacrifice, pawn to e4. At first it may seem like not the most sound idea for white, something dubious. White is sacrificing the pawn for nothing, right? Because black obviously can capture it right here, and he probably will. But think about this. When you're playing online in the internet, especially when it's a blitz game, in order to win the game, you need to create problems for your opponents, right? That's what Carlsen, the Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, says. People crack under pressure. You gotta create those problems for them. And one of the best ways for you to create problems for your opponent early on in the game is to play a gambit. Because after that, once you sacrifice the pawn, here what it gives to you is that it gives you a couple extra temples for development, as well as a bunch of open lines which you can later use to attack your opponent. And let's see how you can do these precisely. Now, initially, when this gambit originated, way back, I don't even remember when, but a long time ago, the author of this gambit, Blackmar, continued here, pawn to f3, I believe, but then it turned out that it's not the best way for white to play here, because instead of just accepting the gambit, black can play the counter gambit, pawn to e5, destroying the white center, possibly forcing the endgame after the queen exchange, and basically the white's plan fails. Therefore, later on, white found out that right here, instead of playing pawn to f3 immediately, it's better to play knight to c3 first, attacking the pawn. The most natural way for black to play here is obviously knight to f6 in order to protect the pawn on e4, as otherwise white would just take it back. And here white continues with this gambit idea, pawn to f3. And after black recaptures, then you can obviously recapture with the knight, and it's a good move, it's a sound move, but I would actually recommend a different thing for you. Because we're playing in a gambit style, right? You can continue playing in style, and you can capture that pawn f3 with the queen, which puts even more challenging problems for black to sort out. Another good thing about playing queen takes f3 is that it creates an unusual situation, and it's quite likely that your opponent is not familiar with this opening line, and therefore he or she will have to think independently instead of just repeating the book moves or moves played by some of the world top players. And it's, again, always good. They'll spend the time thinking about the right decisions, and they'll probably don't find the right moves anyway. Anyway, right here after white played queen to f3, he offers another pawn to be sacrificed, and naturally black would probably wish to take it. And otherwise, you can see that white can actually protect this pawn, because by developing the queen early, white is also kinda preparing long side castling in the future. Obviously white needs to develop his dark square bishop first, but after that white is ready to castle long side, and then the pawn on d4 will be protected by the rook from d1. Therefore black probably should take the pawn. It's, again, the most natural thing to do. And then white gains another tempo by playing bishop to e3, developing a bishop and at the same time attacking black's queen. What black can do here? Well, obviously he'll need to move the queen away from the attack somewhere. There are a couple options where it can go, but for the most part the white's plan remains to be the same. Let's say black plays queen to b4, the move which seems to be the most aggressive, as it puts pressure on the white's pawn on b2. From there it'll attack the rook, the knight, and it seems like the most natural move which white can play here, which is long side castling. It's part of the white's plan. But at this point it seems that this move is just losing, because black has the move bishop to g4. And we'll take a look at this move in just a moment, but before we dive into those variations, let me tell you that overall, the position that we have right here is already fairly dangerous for black, I would say. And, it's pretty good for you, because black did not really play any terrible blunders. He didn't really play any wrong moves, right? He played the most natural moves, so to speak. But all of a sudden, his position is already pretty dangerous. White is ready to jump with his knight to b5, threatening knight takes c7 checkmate. Pretty strong threat. The queen on b4 sometimes can be attacked, even by the rook from d4, and also it's in a little bit of a trouble sometimes. Overall, you can see that white is ahead in development, and sometimes he can play queen g3 also, aiming to capture that c7 pawn by the queen, and again, the queen will be around the black's king, and so again, it's going to be really dangerous for black. Therefore, white already has a bunch of threats, and he's ahead in development. And black must be extremely careful right here to not lose the game quickly. And the move which black will probably play, unless they are familiar with this line, which is bishop to g4, because it looks like with the white's previous move castling, white just blundered this move. And from here, the bishop attacks both the queen and the rook, and therefore, yeah, it looks like white is just losing. But white has prepared a really strong counter blow. This is knight to b5. White is creating the checkmating threat, knight takes c7. And therefore black has no time to capture the queen, in this case just knight takes c7 checkmate. Let's see what else black can try to play here. Let's say he tries to give some escape path to his king and plays pawn to e5. Certainly not the best move, but the following variation is so beautiful that I'd like to share it with you. White goes knight takes c7, king to e7, and at this point it looks like the situation is really intense, and both players are attacking each other, but there is a deadly blow that white can deliver right here, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. You may pause the video, think about this position, and try to find the winning shot for white. If you can find it, please write it down in the comments below. I'll give you a couple more seconds to think about it. It's queen takes b7. Deflecting the black's queen from protection of the c5 square, and after that bishop to c5. Really interesting checkmate, delivering checkmate with a bishop to the black's centralized king, an extremely rare situation. Really beautiful. Let's go over these moves once again just to make sure you remember them well. Right here white sacrifices a pawn, pawn to e4, and then he attacks this pawn with his knight by playing knight to c3. Black protects the e4 pawn with his knight, and white continues playing in a gambit style by playing pawn to f3, and then after the pawn exchange white takes there with the queen, sacrificing one more pawn, this time the pawn on d4, and then white continues bishop to e3, developing a bishop with a tempo. Queen goes to, well, let's first take a look at queen to b4, the line we just looked a minute ago, and right here white can castle with a bunch of different threats, and from here black has the move which seems to be winning, bishop to g4, but in fact this is a clever trap that white just set called Halosar trap, because right here white has a winning move, knight to b5, threatening knight takes c7. Alright, and the move which is probably the best for black is to protect that c7 pawn with his knight. Knight goes to a6, but it doesn't really help because knight from b5 not only it attacks the c7 pawn, but it also blocks the line for the black's queen, and therefore it does not protect the b7 pawn anymore, and white can now capture it, creating a whole bunch of new threats like queen takes a8, queen takes a6, knight takes c7, and black is actually defenseless. For example, if he tries rook to b8, there are many things white can do, but white can also deliver one more beautiful checkmate. Can you find it? Once again, I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. It's actually a relatively simple tactical motif, but still you gotta be able to find it. If you can, write it down in the comments below. So here white takes queen takes b8, deflecting the knight from a6, and then knight takes c7 checkmate. Another cool variation right here. Now rook to b8 is certainly losing. Probably better option for black is to play queen to e4, where it protects that rook on a8, but at the same time it doesn't really help. White can just grab the knight, and then black has to also take something, so queen takes c3, king to b1, and now white has a lot of different threats. Knight takes c7, queen to c6, and black is defenseless. For example, if he takes the rook, then white goes queen to c6, and then something like knight d7, queen takes a8, and white is winning. Black could have played something else, but in all the variations white is winning right here, and therefore this line is certainly winning for white. Now let's come back to this crucial position. We have just observed a couple lines after black plays queen to b4 and white castles long side, and from there we saw that black is kind of in trouble. Therefore black needs to find a better option, and the better option is queen to g4. This way black manages to gain an extra tempo, while offering this exchange of queens, and white certainly does not want that. He sacrificed 2 pawns and he wants to continue his attack in the middle game, in the opening. Therefore, he does not want to trade queens, and he has to go back queen to f2 to save the queens on the board. And even though queen g4 is a better option for black, it does not really change the situation dramatically. White is still going to make lone side castling. He can prepare this by playing knight to f3 so that the black's queen does not cover this option for white. And therefore white is going to go knight f3 lone side castling, and from there it's pretty much the same thing. White has a lot of open lines and a lot of tactical options to continue his attack. Let's take a look at the game between Diemer, one of the founders of this gambit. Actually, it's named by this guy. It's called Blackmar Diemer Gambit, and therefore he certainly knew a thing or two about it. And from here he played against Ports. I don't know that player. Anyway, black played knight to e4. White traded the knights and made this lone side castling. Black played pawn to a6. Perhaps he wanted to stall bishop b5, or I'm not exactly sure. White played knight f3. Certainly the right way to do. Black played pawn to f6. Perhaps he was worried about white playing knight to g5. Perhaps he was worried about white playing knight to g5, attacking the queen and the f7 pawn, and so he played pawn to f6. White plays bishop d3, developing one more piece. By the way, another useful motif, bishop d3 is a good move, perhaps the best move in this position, but just for you, like, so that you know one more idea, white can also go rook to d4 fairly often in this gambit, because black has the centralized queen, and white may wish to take advantage of that situation and chase the queen and gain even more extra temples for his development. So that's another useful move common for this variation. In the actual game, he played bishop to d3, black played queen a4, attacking the pawn on a2, and white played pawn to a3, which is a normal thing to do, but in this particular position I would say that it's a bit too passive. As you may notice, black actually has pretty much all of his pieces standing on their original positions, and therefore definitely white has no reason to defend. He should try to attack. And another really common way for white to develop his attack is play queen to g3, not only in the given position but also in other variations that black can possibly do something else. But queen g3 is always an option, because due to the absence of black's queen on d8, that pawn on c7 is unprotected, and therefore white can take aim at that pawn, and if white can bring his queen right there, close to the black's king, attacking the bishop, it can create a lot of damage, and therefore queen g3 would be a much more aggressive option for white. And then let's say if black tries pawn to e5, just trying to close the line, then white can actually win the game right away. And I'll give you once again, a couple seconds to think about it. It's a little bit more complex than the previous lines. Here you need to calculate a few moves ahead, but if you're able to do this, write it down in the comments below. So can you find the winning move? It's bishop to g6 check. White is going after black's king because really he can deliver the checkmate right away. Then king goes to e7, bishop c5 check, king to e6, the only move, in knight g5. Again, really interesting, unusual, and beautiful checkmate for the black's centralized king. Really cool gambit. I actually enjoyed a lot. I hope that you enjoyed as well. And by the way, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I'm planning on a lot more cool stuff for you, so don't miss out on that. Make sure that you're subscribed. And now let's come back to what happened in the actual game. If you remember, in the actual game, right here, instead of playing queen g3, which is the best move, white played a little bit more passively pawn to a3. Black played knight to c6, white played queen to d2, the move which frankly I don't understand. Black played bishop e6, white played rook e1, bringing the last piece into play and potentially creating some threats along this e-file. Black castles, white plays bishop f2, attacking the bishop. Black plays bishop f7, and actually it looks like black is doing really well, and he just needs a couple more moves to finalize his development and he will be 2 pawns up simply, but that's exactly the moment where white prepared his final combination. Bishop f5 check. Black played pawn to e6, and if black goes king b8, there would be a similar continuation to the game. E6 is a better option for black, so let's take a look at this. And at this point, once again, it looks like white is in trouble. His queen is attacked, as well as the bishop on f5, and black is still 2 pawns up. Does it mean that white should resign? Certainly not. White has the final winning shot right here, which he played in the game and he won it in a couple moves. And you can just challenge yourself once again and try to find the winning shot. It's rook takes e6. So what's the point of the idea? White is sacrificing the whole queen. And in case black accepts the sacrifice, white has the double check, rook e8, which is simultaneously a checkmate. Notice that it's a double check, and therefore there is no way for black to cover his king from both checks simultaneously. Therefore, it's a checkmate. That's why black can't take the queen, and instead he took the rook. White recaptured, king goes to b8, and here white sacrifices the queen anyway. Queen takes d8, recapturing there by the rook. And notice that h7 square is controlled by the white's dark square bishop, and therefore it is a checkmate as well. Today you learned this really aggressive chess opening, some of the best opening that you can choose for your online blitz games and even for your over-the-board tournament games if you're facing like the club level players. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please hit that like button, and in case you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below and I'll be sure to follow up. I hope that you'll have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.